So from Osama bin Laden, who was an engineer, to Ayman al-Zawahiri, who was a doctor, to a neuroscientist, Dr. Afia Siddiqui, a Pakistani in an American jail. Or take, for example, you remember that London School of Economics pass out Umar Saeed Sheikh, the man who killed Daniel Pearl, was in an Indian jail, had to be released in lieu of IC-814 passengers, played a key role in plotting of 9/11. Highly educated intellectuals. Are they a bigger threat to society because of their intellect and the use of that intellect to spread terror? Joining me on India First is Lieutenant General KJS Dhillon. General Tiny Dhillon is former Kashmir Corps commander, was also Director General of India's Defense Intelligence Agency. Sushant Sareen is a senior fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. Yashovardhan Azad is former Special Director of the Intelligence Bureau. With me is also Dr. Soumya Avasthi, a fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, a counter-terrorism expert. I also have Srishti Ojha joining me in just a moment. But first, I want you to listen in to Sharjeel Imam's speech on cutting off India, that portion of his speech to cut off India's chicken's neck so that the Northeast is cut off. Listen in.
5 लाख लोग हमारे पास हो ऑर्गेनाइज्ड, तो हम हिंदुस्तान और नॉर्थ ईस्ट को परमानेंटली कट कर सकते हैं। पर हम परमानेंटली नहीं तो कम से कम 1 महीने के लिए तो कट कर ही सकते हैं। मतलब इतना मवाद डालो पटरियों पर, रोड पे, उनको हटाने में 1 महीना लगे, है कि नहीं? जाए एयरफोर्स से। असम को काटना हमारी जिम्मेदारी है। असम और इंडिया कट के अलग हो जाए, तभी ये हमारी बात सुनेंगे। असम में जो मुसलमानों का हाल है आपको पता है, सीए नाफिज हो चुका है, वहाँ डिटेंशन कैंप में लोग डाले जा रहे हैं।
I want to bring in Srishti Ojha before I bring in General Satish Dua and our other guests joining us on this show. Srishti, bring us details of the context of what ASG SV Raju said in court today.
Well, Gaurav, one thing is very clear. The Delhi police has been in court with full guns blazing, firing off back-to-back arguments. Firstly, as we know, with the regime change blueprint argument that they raised in, and now with the arguments about intellectuals becoming terrorists, and also playing an entire compilation of the speeches given by Sharjeel Imam, which was played before the Supreme Court to make one very simple point, which the Additional Solicitor General also asked court, that this was not, the 2020 Delhi riots were not a peaceful protest. They were not even a protest, they were a violent protest, and that is what the plan was always from the beginning. He played these clippings from the various speeches given by Sharjeel Imam to raise one question: would these things be said by somebody who is trying to ask people to organize a peaceful protest? Even when asked by the court that the word violent is not used by him, the lawyer said very clearly that would you say these things, the words he used when he spoke about separating Assam from India, or talking about chicken neck, would you make these statements if you were only planning to organize a peaceful protest against the CAA NRC? The idea, according to Delhi police, is that they wanted to instigate the Muslim population against the government. Not just that, economically strangle Delhi and Assam. The nature of protest was such that it would deprive people of essentials. Now, another big statement, as
so let's take this step by step. I'll come back to you. That's a very major point you're making. One, their aim was to talking about cutting off Assam, and two, incite communal passions. You know, get Muslims to get excited and then take on the state. General Dua, you've handled through your 40 or plus career in the armed forces, sir, soldiers, young boys, and who've come as young recruits to senior officers, 18-year-old who've made the supreme sacrifice for their lives or won the Paramveer Chakra like in Kargil. In your appreciation, sir, if a youth were to make a speech like cut off India at Assam, a harmless speech, campus discussion, or in your appreciation, far more sinister?
Your last 3 words are very operative. Far more sinister. Why it is far more sinister is that, when a student leader or a young educated man makes a speech like this, when a doctor does what we are seeing unfolding, we have seen unfolding in the Red Fort blast case, when such people from the society, educated people, make such speeches or commit such acts like this terror logging that's been uncovered, where doctors are coming up with white collar terrorism, is far more sinister, far more dangerous for a couple of reasons. One, these people, when they merge with the society, it's very easy for them to merge with society, in the society. Uh, in fact, they are looked up upon. Even if whether it's a checkpoint or if it's any section of society, when he says I'm a doctor, people are going to be respectful of him. Uh,
Yes.
Unlike in the line of control, where if there is an infiltrator, he's taken as a terrorist and taken down. But on the other hand, what is far also more important is that such peoples are icons. This doctor or this 3, 4 doctors that have been caught so far, and the others educated people. This doctor must be a hero in his village back somewhere in
Yes.
Kashmir, and because he is a hero, he will be able to. There'll be others who will be willing to follow his path. His video that comes out nonchalantly swiveling in his chair and talking about shahadat. Now, these things are going to again mobilize some of the youth towards terrorism. They're going to
Very
radicalize some of the
important point you make. Very, very
This is
important
very
point that
important.
he's a hero already. And when he makes these speeches, he'll inspire others to become terrorists, other youngsters. Sushant Sareen, the point that General Dua was raising, in an emergency, if a doctor wearing a lab coat, stethoscope, gadi with that plus sign, medical sign, if he's passing through a checkpoint and he says, I'm a doctor, I'm rushing for an emergency, he may have weapons in his car, the police will let him go. Is that why these intellectuals who become terrorists are far more dangerous in society?
Gaurav, not just because, that ways you can just take any van, make it into an ambulance and claim that, you want to take weapons somewhere. So those kind of tactics can be used by anybody. You don't have to be a doctor for that. But the thing is that the danger in educated people taking to terrorism is that they behave like ideologues. I think General Dua raised that point that they can actually start influencing people. If you look at all terrorist organizations, not just in India, outside India, even look at the Maoists, for example, who are the people who are really the ideologues? These are people who are very highly educated. The foot soldiers or the commanders might be slightly different, but the guys who actually provide the ideological ballast that leads to people being recruited and people joining ranks and closing ranks and fighting against the state and massacring people, they are obviously far more dangerous. Now, this particular clip that you're playing out, we'd all heard this 5 years back when this was made. And frankly, I think that the judiciary also needs to stop hair splitting on what exactly were the words used. Now, unless it is the case of the judiciary that until and unless one has said absolutely specifically that he is asking people to take to violence, uh, I think that would be a misreading of the intentions of this kind of a character. So
Okay.
clearly, these kind of people are very, very dangerous. Also, remember that terrorism is the handiwork not of the illiterate and the unlettered. Whether you look at organizations like Al Badr, you look at even the Lashkar-e-Taiba, they
Yes.
actually first try and indoctrinate people, get them into agreeing with the cause before they send them out on missions. So clearly, that task, whether it's of training suicide bombers, indoctrinating people, providing the ideological basis for it, cannot be done by an unlettered man. It is done by
So
the
let me
educated.
bring in Dr. Soumya Avasthi before I bring in Mr. Yashovardhan Azad. Dr. Avasthi, what is the definition of an intellectual terrorist? Because let me play the devil's advocate for a moment. So he made a speech. He's just made a speech. Has that speech been followed up by action to cut off India at Assam? If it hasn't, then it's an academic exercise.
Yes, absolutely right, Gaurav. When you talk about that, he has just made a speech. So, in the democratic framework, he is using his freedom of expression to talk about political, differences that he has. So, this becomes one of the ways in which these radical ideologues or the youth, which is dissuaded, is using its political understanding and narrative for justifying its act. and motivating more and more people to use that indoctrination and make it as a part of their identity. And most of the time, this is also a reason that they are able to rationalize the violence that is going on. Sometimes they will end up comparing terrorist with Bhagat Singh. And I clearly remember during my own field work when I interacted with some, people, suspects, OGWs in the Jammu jail post Pulwama attack. The only question and argument that he was giving to me was that, well, if Bhagat Singh could do it for freedom and liberation and rights and
Okay.
justice, why am I a terrorist? If Bhagat Singh is not a terrorist, how am I? So that kind of an argument is often raised by them. So they use these moral cognitive framing and moral justifications to argue with faith, politics, history, and they do all this through
Let me bring in
selective
Yashovardhan Azad there,
ideological.
because that's an important point you're raising there, Mr. Azad. For the intelligence agencies, does it become even more difficult to detect these elements and to proceed against them? One, if it's a closed group, how difficult is it to infiltrate into their organization? In the case of Sharjeel Imam, he made public speeches. But others, these intellectual terrorists who may be behind speaking the way they are behind closed doors, these doctors, for example, they went undetected for years. Is that an intelligence failure, or that's the difficulty, that they use code words like a heart attack? Even if you're snooping, you would think, okay, doctor, they're talking about a heart attack. You wouldn't know it's all about a terror attack.
Well, it's certainly a huge problem to penetrate such networks, and especially if they are being planned from very close quarters. You're absolutely right. The Al-Falah, I do think it's a kind of a it's a kind of a failure. It's kinds of a security breach, I would say, because something like this, which has been happening for about 2.5 years, and nobody gets any idea about it. I mean, it's certainly dangerous. You see, the issue is one point which is important, I think, which Sushant raised was that, the Supreme Court, they always say, unless the danger is imminent, unless the action is precipitated immediately after a speech like that, it can just be an exercise of democratic dissent. That is not true, because there are many facetious arguments also we've been placed in the name of democracy. There is you're spreading disaffection amongst the ranks. If you're saying that Assam should be cut off from India, I mean, think of it. There is a youth leader who's spreading this disaffection amongst the youth. I'm worried about them the maximum. And when you're talking about the educated terrorism and the impact, it becomes more and more dangerous here. So therefore, the courts will have to sort of take a decision on this, that anything which is anti-national, I mean, it doesn't give, there are various forms of dissent. There are many in the CA, I think, who are absolutely fine. They were democratically, protesting, but not ideologues like this. I mean,
No,
this
before
is...
I bring in Srishti, I want to understand, sir,
Yeah.
Shaheen Bagh Dadis, Sushant Sareen, the Shaheen Bagh Dadis, everyone said, oh, old ladies, they're protesting for democracy, they're protesting for Muslim rights. Are those Shaheen Bagh Dadis the facade and break India the real danger that Shaheen Bagh Dadis were the cover-up for, Sushant?
Uh, Gaurav, allow me just 30 seconds to say something which Soumya had spoken about before I come to your question. This Bhagat Singh analogy has been done to death. And frankly speaking, it's a completely misplaced analogy, which many of these guys who justify their action by equating themselves with Bhagat Singh do. Number one, Bhagat Singh did not commit mass murder. Number two, he carried out an action which did kill somebody, but he did not kill any innocent people, like most of these terrorists go about doing, blowing bombs and killing and massacring people. But third, and most importantly, I think we should be very careful about who we make our heroes. Remember one thing, and I know a lot of people will pillory me for this. Bhagat Singh was never endorsed by Mahatma Gandhi, who never approved of his ways. And there is a reason why
It was a
Mahatma Gandhi.
disaster, though, because Bhagat Singh, okay, I know that's another debate and we'll have it at another time.
Okay.
I swear to God, I wish Mahatma Gandhi had defended him.
No,
Anyway,
I
but that's
think
another debate.
Gandhiji was a far better politician than I don't consider him to be a great man, but I think he understood politics. He understood how to run a freedom movement better than anybody else. with all his wackiness and all the other things which he would do. But I think he was a political genius and he took the right path by not backing somebody like a Bhagat Singh. But having said that, on your question, look, all terrorist organizations have a use for useful idiots. Now, maybe the dadis who came out were feeling insecure because of the kind of propaganda that had been carried out against CAA. Nobody really figured out the fact that it was no Indian Muslims' rights were being taken. It was only
Absolutely.
other people who were going to be given rights. But the entire propaganda was that Indian Muslims are going to be disenfranchised and are going to be thrown out of India, which was utter nonsense. So most of these dadis who came out maybe came out for right reasons. But the fact is that many of them were being used and exploited to create this entire movement around which other people would gravitate. So I think that would be the handiwork of people like the Sharjeel Imam and the rest of this bunch who would be using those tactics so that the movement catches fire. And then where were the dadis to be seen after that? They were nowhere,
Okay.
right? So I
Okay.
think we
General
need to be
Dua,
careful. Start
yes.
making heroes out of people.
You know, Jaldua, that was the threat, and you must have dealt with it so extensively, even in Jammu and Kashmir. Highly educated young men, the incendiary speeches and the incendiary action, and then, of course, the facade, harmless protests, we're protesting for rights, it's their right to protest. In the case of Shaheen Baghdadi's, even though the fact was known, CAA had nothing to do with Indian Muslims or their rights, nothing to do with it. Government was crying itself hoarse from rooftops saying it. And yet, this was a, would you see this as the, and I want to bring in Srishti Ojha in just a moment, that this was a regime change operation as the police have submitted in court?
Uh, I cannot comment on the fact that it was a regime change operation, but it was something very sinister. It was certainly not a small protest against an enactment of the CAA. It was certainly something more sinister. There were people behind it who put their weight behind it to whether it's regime change or create turmoil in our country, and they succeeded in this because there was turmoil in several parts of the country, and I think that is
Okay.
the reason why we have to be more careful of such things in future. My guess is that we have just busted one terror module. There is a whole ecosystem waiting to be unearthed. This module, this planning for this attack was before the Pahalgam attack as it is coming out.
Yes.
So we don't know how many more such modules are there which have the potential of creating such trouble. So whether it is
हमारी
that kind
आस्तीन
of
में कितने
speeches,
और सांप है is the point you're raising, and that's a very pertinent point you're raising. You know, they may be masquerading as intellectuals living amongst us, but plotting to kill us. Srishti, did the Delhi police or the ASG back this claim of a regime change operation with evidence? Of course, it's a bail plea, so evidence doesn't have to be placed. But on what basis are they concluding that 2020 anti-CAA riots were actually a regime change operation?
Well, Gaurav, as we know, even in its affidavit, the Delhi police had very clearly stated that the protests were not a simple, it was not a spontaneous protest, but there was an attempt to destabilize the Indian state through an orchestrated civil unrest. There was a covert, foreign inspired regime change model. The entire thing was pre planned and well orchestrated. And when we talk about these speeches and the statement that the ASG made about intellectuals becoming terrorists was also in a way to supplement it, to add on to their own arguments that they've made till now. What was the context? Why would they raise this argument? The idea of prosecution telling the court about this is to basically play these clippings and ask a simple question. Tell the court that these aren't people. The person making these speeches aren't people who do not know what they're doing. These are intellectual people who the common persons who are hearing them out in the crowd will take seriously. Why? Because they're engineers. they're doctors, they're scholars. So the idea, and another thing that we saw the AG point out is that these intellectuals are at the end of the day using state funding, state assistance. The state is helping you in studying and becoming doctors or engineers, and then when you do these nefarious activities, you're much more dangerous than any ground level terrorist, because
Correct.
people will
So you're
take you
far
more
more dangerous
seriously.
than an Ajmal Amir Kasab. At least with an Ajmal Amir Kasab, you knew that's a Pakistani terrorist, an illiterate terrorist who was
Exactly.
radicalized at a madrasa. But these highly educated doctors or engineers or so-called intellectuals are being radicalized, and how, and radicalizing so many more. But I now want to shift focus to the other aspect, and I want you to look at this very carefully. That university that stands accused of either turning a blind eye or being complicit in the terror plot. Now, Faridabad's Al-Falah University is under the scanner, and there's intense scrutiny. It's linked not only to the recent suicide attack in Delhi by this Dr. Muhammad Umar, the white-collar terror network, and money laundering investigations have started. Investigators say the Al-Falah University has a darker past, a history. Now, an alumnus of this university was Mirza Shadab Baig. Who is Mirza Shadab Baig? Now, that person you see on your television screen next to Dr. Muhammad Umar, that photograph is of a key plotter of the 2008 serial blasts in Delhi and in Ahmedabad. In fact, as an aside, I'll also tell you, this war against Indian Mujahideen, or that domestic terrorist units, intensified, and in the right earnest started. Narendra Modi was then Chief Minister of Gujarat, and after the Ahmedabad bombing and the same failed Surat attacks, he tasked the Gujarat police, go wherever you have to go, arrest the perpetrators. I spoke to police officers who carried out those raids. They went all the way to Azamgarh. They came to Delhi. Subsequently, that Batla House encounter, intelligence inputs had come in from Gujarat. Much more on that story on another day. But Al-Falah University for the moment, more than 200 doctors, staff, present and past, currently under investigation. We get you more in this report.
A trail of blood and death extends from the Red Fort blast all the way to the Al-Falah University at Delhi's doorsteps. From the deadly 2008 Delhi serial blasts to the shocking Red Fort attack, Al-Falah University in Faridabad is now emerging as a hub of terror. The university is under intense scrutiny, linked not only to the Red Fort blast and Jaish white-collar terror network and money laundering, but also to the 2008 serial blasts. Mirza Shadab Baig, a notorious member of the Indian Mujahideen, also studied in the suspected terror hub. Baig, a resident of Azamgarh, completed his B.Tech in Electronics and Instrumentation at Al-Falah University in 2007. He was likely a student when he first became involved in planning the 2008 serial blasts across India, including the Gorakhpur, Ahmedabad and Jaipur. He remains at large despite a massive manhunt. The university's chairman, Javed Ahmed Siddiqui, has been arrested in a PMLA case for alleged money laundering. He's in ED custody for 13 days. Investigators have raided 25 locations linked to the university, uncovering financial irregularities worth 415 crore, shell companies and evidence of fund diversion. And now a demolition notice for his illegal property in Mao has been issued. The links to terrorist activities have cast a dark shadow over Al-Falah. Over 200 doctors and staff are under investigation. Hostels and off-campus rooms rented by doctors and students have been raided, and deleted mobile data is under scanner. More than 1,000 have already been questioned. As investigations continue, more questions are being raised about Al-Falah's role in fostering a terror ecosystem. With Arvind Ojha and Shreya Chatterjee, Bureau Report, India Today.
Dr. Awasthi, the Al-Falah University had a terrorists under training in 2008 and several in 2025. Is it possible those studying there with them, the staff, the teachers, the professors, wouldn't know anything about it? You and I would know what's happening in and around our neighborhood or in our schools and colleges. Can others say in Al-Falah University that we knew nothing? Or is there something amiss here?
Certainly, you can't get away, like the university can't get away by saying that we were not aware. In fact, to my surprise and to, I'm sure to everybody's surprise, even now when Al-Falah is under the radar and there is a investigation going on, some bunch of Indians are still ready to go take admission and send their kids to this university. And at the moment also, they're offering these 15 to 20 vacant seats for the 2025-2026 academic year. So I wonder how people are still not able to use their judgment. And for the university to say that they are not aware is something not to be believed at all, because whether it is university, whether it is a madrasa or even a local coaching center, they all work in tandem. Corruption at its peak, and it's easy to keep everybody's mouth shut. Sometimes they even use fear to develop this sense in them to keep stay away from the business. So it's hardly true to say that they are not aware.
You know, Mr. Azad, this perhaps would be the biggest failure of India's intelligence agencies in this particular case, not knowing what's happening inside the Al-Falah University. And for so long, if the plot was being hatched over 2 years, there were links in Lucknow, there were links in Srinagar, Naugam, Shopian, Pulwama, apparently also with some ex-doctors working in Mamoon, close to Mamoon cantonment in Pathankot and other parts of the country. Our agencies do nothing.
I've always already given my opinion on this, that for the last 2.5 years that this module was developing, it's unfortunate that nobody got even a whiff of it, none of the state intelligence agencies or even the IB. Second, what is more worrying is that while this plot was being hatched in the 2 rooms, 13 and 20, none of the doctors came forward and said anything, which shows a lot about the man-to-man contact which the government agencies have with the university and otherwise, because some of them kept quiet out of fear, some of them were complicit, and some of them just not interested. Now, about the Al-Falah University, I will not make a quick judgment here, because of course, they were mired in corruption. There is a money laundering angle to it. But to say that they were actively complicit in fostering this terrorist module, that I will not say as yet. But yes, I know this much, that most of the medical colleges and most of these engineering colleges which are running and flourishing all over the country, they are dens of corruption, and they're by politicians and all kinds of people. Also, Al-Falah University has already been taken to task because they gave the wrong impression to the students and their guardians that it's a recognized university. That is one of the biggest frauds that they have taken. But the most serious part is that these 2,900 kgs explosives were just in and around the university. These doctors was going back and forth, going to New, coming back in their various cars. No security system, none in the staff, and nobody even reported. That is something which is very, very serious. And that's why it's very important now to see the linkages of these modules in various states as to what they are going to throw up.
Yeah, because Sushant Sareen, those who are saying that, oh my God, you're going after doctors, or you're going after Muslims, or you're going after Kashmiris, are they providing intellectual cover fire? Let that investigation happen, free, fair, transparent investigation, instead of, this vilap that suddenly happens that this is Islamophobia. This clearly is is this a surgical operation against a very, very sinister module?
So, Gaurav, I think there will be even more sinister modules going forward. And I think we should now start developing a bit of a thick skin and turn a deaf ear to all these Rudalis who weep for terrorists. Uh, that has been happening for the last 40 years. And I don't know why we waste our breath even talking about these third-rate people who provide this covering fire to these terrorists. Having said that, I also say that, look, if you are going to take an action against somebody, there should be a good reason to take action against that university.
Absolutely.
So, for example, in the case of Shadab Baig, when the guy was found involved in terrorism, did anybody in the security services check his antecedents that, well, he had gone to this particular university? Did they try and figure out whether this university was, as Mr. Jha very correctly says, most of these universities, these newfangled universities, deemed universities, and what have you, are actually dens of corruption. They should never be allowed to function. I don't know on what basis these universities are even allowed to function. And somebody, and look, while we can go after the terrorists, and by all means we should do that, what about going after the people who give these people approvals? What
Yes.
happens to them? They get away scot free. Nobody goes after them. How was a university like this allowed to function for 30 years? Somebody should ask these questions now. Who's asking these questions? Who are you holding responsible for allowing these universities? These characters in various government institutions who are passing out these certificates to these universities like they are reveries, should they not be prosecuted? Should they not be fixed?
Okay.
Clearly,
Okay.
there are these third-rate universities which are actually doing more harm than good, because kids who come out of these universities are good for nothing.
Well,
And
if they're
yet
buying
people are
ammonium nitrate to kill, there at least some of these kids were good at making bombs and killing innocent people. So whoever is the bomb making teacher, Dr. Avasthi seems to have done his job well training these terrorists. But I just want to understand the bomb maker, the trainer. Are we still, too slow in getting to the bottom of this case? Or in your view, without fear of favor, irrespective where they may have been, the government should go after these elements across the country? Often it is said that even after 26/11, that wider ecosystem, nobody went after those who were, enabling the 26/11 Mumbai terror attacks.
Yeah, I think it's time to call spade a spade, whether it is Al-Falah University or the corruption behind it that allowed these kinds of mushrooming to happen around this university as well as these kinds of universities. So it is time that we call it spade a spade, and without wasting too much of time in collecting evidences, because I think we have got enough evidences to prove our point. So the investigation should now raise its bar and go to the next step. And yes, absolutely correct. These highway universities, which we often see when we travel to different states, these need to be, checked at the same time, in the same breath, in the same spirit that we are
Okay.
doing with the Al-Falah University.
Had this been in Jammu and Kashmir, for example, Jal Dua, how would officials have known that there is this such a group operating in a university, making bombs, plotting a terror attack? Do we take it very easy just because this is not Kashmir and it's Faridabad?
You think in Jammu and Kashmir, I will concede that the intelligence apparatus and security forces are a little more focused and geared towards, I beg your pardon, geared towards terrorism. Uh, but the fact of the matter is that, just like in our days, when in our younger days, we used to trust the intelligence of a beat cop. A beat cop's intelligence was always very good and to the point and very timely. Similarly, I think now the time has come, especially with this white collar terrorism, educated people getting into this and such institutions getting involved. We have to have something called I would use campus watch or WhatsApp group watch or community watch. We really need to have our eyes and ears open. We also, I would enjoin on all citizens to be able to take up that role for themselves, because if we find, like we announced at the railway stations and airports, if there is anything unclaimed baggage found anywhere, please report it to authorities. Similarly, if we find any inciting speeches being made in any WhatsApp group or a university or some other place, I think we need to report it, and then we should have eyes. Intelligence agencies have to have their eyes and ears open, because we are going to be seeing a bigger spread, a far more wider spread of this malaise or white collar terrorism affecting our daily lives, and we all need to wake.
Sushant Sareen, last 30 seconds on this part of the show. You agree? Are we inadequately prepared, or are we adequately prepared to deal with white collar terror?
Look, yeah, nobody is going to be completely prepared to deal with white collar terror, because these are people like us. They hide in plain sight. And very often, we have a stereotype of what a terrorist looks like. Uh, and frankly, that's the most silly thing anybody can do. Terrorists are people like us, some often enough. So if you go in, for example, into Maoist terrorism, you will see people from that region only becoming part of the terror crowd, right? You look at any terrorist organization and the area in which it operates. If you think that guys are going to come like some kind of a Bollywood stereotype, that's not going to happen. Which basically means that, like General Dua says, you keep your eyes and ears open. You must have some system of trying to figure out, and maybe somebody like Mr. Jha can speak better on that, on what are the kind of conversations taking place in university campuses. Who are the
Yes.
people who might be gravitating towards a particular dangerous course of action, right? Or might be imbibing some very dangerous and very sinister kind of ideologies, and then maybe even expounding on them.
To a
So
very
I think,
large extent, it also needs to happen from within the community, Sushant Sareen. You know, they would perhaps know better what's happening, and their
but
silence.
that, Gaurav, allow me half a minute. I think for that, it's also necessary for the security services to be very sensitive. That if, for example, somebody was to come, I was to come to you and say that I think General Dua might be involved in certain things, then number one, I should be protected. My name should not come
Yes.
out. Number two, you should not go after General Dua without first figuring out whether actually the guy is involved or not. Number
True.
three, if families come out and say that, look, my kid might be taking to a certain path, there has to be a certain amount of sensitivity that security services also need to show, which very
Okay.
often does not happen because the local cop culture is कि यार दो थप्पड़ लगाओ तो ठीक हो जाएगा बंदा.
True.
It
Dr.
doesn't work
Awasthi, last 30 seconds, you wanted to have your closing comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to extend the argument and say that there are mechanisms in place in many countries where people are, the university faculty keeps observing these changes in the scholars, and from time to time give them a counseling system is there in place, which then taps into their, thinking mechanism. So
Did
probably that kind
Al-Falah
of
University do
institution.
that? Were they
No,
ill
Al-Falah never
prepared?
did that, and I hope that
Exactly. And,
we can
and
reduce
why?
these white collar
That's the
terrorists.
matter of investigation, because clearly this white collar terrorism, highly educated individuals taking to terror, far more dangerous, far more sinister for society. To my guests for joining me here on this part of India First. Many thanks.